In this video, we are testing out the four-wheel drive and off-road capabilities of three luxury SUVs, the full-size Range Rover, the Mercedes GLS, and the new Lexus LX 600. Let's go hit it. All right, now before we get these vehicles out in the dirt, I thought it would be cool to see how they perform in a controlled environment, so we brought them out here to Tumbleweed Ranch to try out the TFL slip test. We get various wheels stuck on purpose in these rollers to see how the four-wheel drive system works to get us unstuck. And today we're just going to be running the hardest test, the three-wheeled slip test. So both front wheels are stuck. Left front is stuck. Only the left rear is on the ground. So that wheel's gonna have to start spinning if we're gonna get unstuck. In this Range Rover, I've gone into the most aggressive off-road mode, rock crawl in low range. Okay, let's see if we can get unstuck. A little bit of throttle, got some spinning. Vehicle keeps cheating, so it kind of crawled on over to the side of the roller, and I think that's probably how we got unstuck, but there was definitely some torque transfer going on, and ultimately we were able to drive off. All right, here we are in the Mercedes-Benz GLE 450, and I've gone into the off-road programming. The vehicle's gonna rise into its higher height, and then we're gonna back onto the rollers and try the Mercedes. Not nearly as many off-road programs as the other two vehicles. Also no low range in this Mercedes, so we are in high range only, and that's all we got. We also have 305 width rear tire, 315, excuse me, width rear tires, which are huge, but we're nice and settled into the rollers. We're in drive, a little bit of accelerator. Come on, Mercedes. Whoa, pretty good. So I just felt a little bit of slipping, but the car was able to really distribute torque to the driver left rear wheel, and we pulled ourselves right off. That was a good result. Now we are in this Lexus LX 600, and we're gonna put it into its most off-road mode. So I've got into low range there on the transfer case, and then I have different modes I can select from. Let the vehicle do its thing. It's gonna rise into a higher suspension height, just like that. Pretty easy. And then let's see what kind of modes I have in this vehicle. VSC is turned off, good news. Oh, here we go. I got a select, multi-terrain select, that's the ticket. And then go into the rock mode. So the rock mode is selected there. Very, very cool. And then I have a manual selector for the center diff lock. So unlike the Range Rover where it's automatic, I can manually click that on, which I've done in the rock programming. Let's see if we can get unstuck. Okay, pretty awesome. So just a little bit of accelerator, diff lock engaged, and we climbed off like nothing. I mean, I would say that actually the response time of the traction control in the Lexus and the Mercedes was quicker than that in the Range Rover, which is pretty interesting. In this next test, we're going to find out what is the travel up and down of the height adjustable suspensions in all three of these vehicles. So to do that, we're going to put them in their lowest setting and then measure from the middle of the center cap to the fender, which in this case is 18 inches in the Range Rover. And now we're going to jack it up and run the same measurement to see what the difference is, lowest setting to highest setting. All right, so we have the suspension in the topmost selectable setting, although Range Rovers typically have a feature where if you get them high-centered, they go up a little higher. But in the highest usable selectable setting, we're at about 21 3/4. So we've gone up about, what is that, 3 3/4 of an inch. At the Mercedes, we're also starting at 18 inches between the center cap and the start of the fender. In the Mercedes, we've increased the gap between the center of the wheel to the fender up to about 20 1/4, so that's an increase of about 2 1/4 inches. Now it's time for the Lexus, so we're going to measure from the center of the center cap to the start of the fender flare there, and you can see 18 inches. And let's put it in the top height and see what the difference is up and down. All right, so we've put the Lexus in its highest suspension setting, and now we are sitting at 23 inches, and that's a whopping difference of 5 inches. So a lot of up and down travel on the Lexus suspension. Now we've got the Range Rover up on the lift to showcase some of the features underneath the vehicle. And first of all, the surprising number of skid plates and protection under here. So we've got one large one that covers up the oil pan, the front diff, the transmission. We've got another one back here which covers up the transfer case. And this vehicle does have a true four-wheel drive with a low range activated here in the transfer case. The rear portion of the transfer case is a little bit exposed, but I love this. Both skid plates are also covered with real protection. So actually underneath, you may suspect this vehicle to be a little lacking. It's actually very protected. Now, as we come around back here, we do notice a couple other things with the Range Rover. This vehicle does have 4-corner independent suspension, and it's riding on air suspension. So at all 4 corners, we have these large inflatable bags that can increase and decrease pressure to lift and lower the vehicle. Now the story is pretty different underneath the Mercedes. So you may also notice a number of shields. However, these are just plastic. You can see I can push them in with just a small amount of force. And that's because this vehicle is primarily intended for on-road use. If you really want to go off-road, you're definitely going to want to check out the G-Wagon. The GLS is made mostly for on-road, but it does have some off-road capability. So you can see we have more of that shielding. We do have this big aluminum extrusion, which does provide at least a little bit of protection for the center-mounted transfer case, but this is only a single range transfer case, no low range, and then a couple other things worth noting out back. Now out back, it's a pretty similar story to the Range Rover. So we still have a 4-corner independent suspension design, a multi-link suspension. You can see the lower control arm there, and then behind the lower control arm, you can see the 4-corner air suspension, which just like the Range Rover, raises and lowers the vehicle. Now as we take a look underneath the Lexus, the first thing which is very impressive is the integrated recovery point in the front of the vehicle. Now the Range Rover has one too, but it's behind a cover. Here in the Lexus, it's easy to get to. As we make our way backwards though, things look a little bit less good because all of these shields, these are just plastic, and I'd really like to see Lexus incorporate some real metal skid plates. Someone has had some fun on this vehicle on the underside. Look how dirty this thing is. Now back here we have our dual range transfer case. This unit does actually have an integrated skid plate, which is really quite nice. And I'm looking at the fuel tank. Wow, someone really had a lot of fun. This is also quite well protected. So a little bit lacking in the front, well protected at the transfer case, pretty well protected at the fuel tank. But out back is where things get really interesting. Now we see a lot of differences in the Lexus compared to the other two. The Lexus is of course based on the 300 series Land Cruiser that we don't get in the US, but this is how we get it. And the first thing you notice is the solid rear axle. Now, of course, the solid rear axle does allow for good articulation. It typically compromises on ride quality, but Lexus has done a really nice job tuning the system. And the other thing you might notice is right here. This vehicle does in fact utilize coil springs on all 4 corners. In the front, they're coil and independent. So how does the vehicle jack itself up and down if it's not riding on air? Well, the secret is actually right here in the shock absorber. There's a hydraulic line that goes to all 4, and this vehicle can actually raise and lower the ride height using hydraulics, which is very cool and a very durable system that is less likely to fail. Let's talk about all the off-road tech in the Range Rover, and there is a ton of it. So Land Rover Range Rover pioneered terrain response, and they just keep improving it over the years. So we've got a number of different off-road modes ranging from normal, we got a snow mode, we got the mud and ruts, the sand, and the rock crawl. There's also an auto programming setting which will let the vehicle decide what to do. We've got a low range button there, hill descent button there. This is of course traction control off. You can control your air suspension here, and this is a cool button. This is called ATPC, which stands for all-terrain progress control. It's kind of like off-road cruise control. And then up here we have even more information, so you can see steering angle, suspension position. You can also see when the vehicle automatically locks up that center differential, and then there's even a couple other settings in here, such as low traction launch, which helps you get out of stuck in kind of rough situations like snow, for example. So lots of cool technology in the Range Rover, lots to play around with. Let's do a little bit of off-roading in all 3 of these to see how they perform. Now, this is, for the eagle-eyed viewers out there, not a brand new Range Rover. This is our new Project Range Rover. It's a 2017, so it's a few years old. It's an L405, which is a previous gen, and ideally I would have liked to have done this comparison with the newest generation. Unfortunately, I couldn't get my hands on one in time, but I didn't want to keep this vehicle out of it completely, because even these L405s are very representative of what new Range Rovers can do off-road. And this vehicle is powered by a 5-liter supercharged V8. It makes 510 horsepower, and this is the long wheelbase L405. And we're going to run this vehicle first through the trenches course, where we get various wheels lifted. We test out the articulation, and then we're going to see how does it perform, and we're going to run trenches in the rock crawl setting with the suspension up. So I've got it in the off-road suspension height, and let's see how it does. Now these trenches are various grooves dug into the earth, designed to get the vehicle off kilter. And we're gonna try it first just in the normal, you know, let's stick it in the rock crawl mode. And then if we get stuck, we can play with the different modes, but I think we're gonna do this with no problem. Now the Range Rover is able to automatically lock and unlock the center diff as it sees fit. So right now it sees fit that it should be locked, which is right. And we're gonna take this slow on purpose. And actually the articulation is so impressive in the Range Rover. It's able to disconnect the front sway bar hydraulically or electrically and give us some more articulation out of the front end, and then with just a little bit of wheel speed, the sensors kick in, lock in the brakes, and distribute torque where it needs to go. We're really able to crawl up some impressive stuff. Now all these vehicles are running on their stock wheels and tires, including the stock rubber, and this Range Rover is rolling on 21-inch wheels and all-season rubber. So this is by no means what you want to off-road with, but you know, to keep it fair, we decided to test all these vehicles as they come from the factory, plus we can't modify the manufacturer cars. So very easy, impressive result as we went through the trenches course. You know, I think the Range Rover had kind of a poor showing on the rollers, but in the real world, it performed extremely well. So now we're gonna test the ride quality up our logs course, also the ground clearance. Now these are logs that we have set into the earth, and some are pretty low to the earth, some are pretty high. We're going to see how comfortable the Range Rover is as we attempt to go over the logs course. 4-corner air suspension, of course, and we're going to also try out the all-terrain progress control, see how smooth and steady that is. Now I can change the speed of the all-terrain progress control using the buttons on my steering wheel. So I'm gonna set it at about 2 miles an hour. My foot is now off of the accelerator altogether, letting the vehicle do all the work. Let's see how it performs. We're still in the rock crawl setting. This is once again not me controlling the throttle. This is all the vehicle. Keeping it nice and smooth, targeting that 2 mile an hour threshold. Okay, we're a little stuck. Can the computer figure out what to do? Yep, it gently applies some throttle. Ah, very impressive. Okay, we're stuck once more. There we go. The car is figuring out what to do. What about here? What's it gonna do here? So I'm letting it do all the thinking, and quite smooth, I have to say. A little slow to respond to changes in terrain, but it's able to do it, and look at that. We crawled right on up. So very impressive performer off-road, these full-size Range Rovers. You know, the wheels are too big, the brakes are too big in this one to really put a small wheel and a fat tire on. But you know, this was a $112,000 car new. We bought it for $45,000, and at least off-road, they're very impressive and also extremely comfortable. Now, as we step inside the GLS Mercedes, a lot less in terms of off-road gear. So we have a dynamic mode selector here, and you can see all the modes: Sport, Comfort, Eco, and there is an off-road mode, which I do need to select, and that puts the engine, the suspension, the steering into an off-road setting. There's also a way here on the cluster I can actually configure it to show. Let's see here. Sport, Classic, my off-road pages, so I can see my pitch and roll, that kind of thing, my steering angle, my throttle and brake position, that kind of thing, all within the screen. But apart from that, no other major programming settings. Welcome now to the Mercedes-Benz GLS 450 2024 model year. This vehicle is one of my all-time favorite 3-row crossovers. It is so comfortable and refined and well put together with the best tech. But let's be honest, of the three here, it's the least meant for off-road terrain. Mercedes does build a legendary off-roader, the G-Wagon, which is not quite in the same class, but is amazing. And we're gonna see how this GLS at least performs off-road. So going down into Andre's pit here. We're in the high suspension height. Let me make sure we are in the correct off-road mode. Why isn't it not letting me change my off-road modes here? There we go. Activate the off-road program. Very cool. We're going to try out the trenches course. Now, what I do think is a little bit of a shame is Mercedes has lost the low range on the GLS. The previous GL did have an actual low range, and it was one of the most impressive three-row off-roaders on the market, especially if you got the off-road pack, which is so rare, super rare, but very, very, very capable in terms of what that vehicle could do. And we're going to see, does a GLS, a new one, still retain that impressive capability? Now, right off the bat, these 315 width tires are ridiculous. This is not the spec I would build if I was going to take it off-road, but it's the spec they provided us. The MSRP on this vehicle is $92,000. It's powered by a 3-liter inline-6 turbo with a mild hybrid system, 48 volt. Now we're in the same trenches as we were in the Range Rover, getting nice and articulated. Applying a little bit more throttle. This is where I could use the torque multiplication of a low range, but still very impressive actually. Was able to figure out what to do, lock up those wheels. Taking it nice and slow. We don't want this to be a test of acceleration. We want this to be a test of the four-wheel drive system, and it's working great. Okay, now we're pretty stuck. So I'm really gonna have to revert to more throttle, especially than I had in the Range Rover. It's definitely struggling a little bit more. So this vehicle is very impressive on the roller test, but in the real world, it's clearly having a little bit more troubles, and we're also picking up wheels a lot more than we were in that Range Rover. So the articulation is worse in the Mercedes, but still, we did make it up. You know, I can't ding it on that. We were able to complete that challenge, and we didn't scrape the bottom, but a little bit more difficulty than we had in the white Range Rover. We're about to try the logs course. Now, I'm very impressed with this powertrain. This 3-liter turbo is so smooth, and with that EQ boost system, it fills in the gaps of acceleration with a little zap of electricity. Also helps a little bit with fuel economy. The smoothest start-stop I've felt in any car. All right, we're about to climb up the logs course here. So once again, I have to use quite a bit of throttle because I don't quite have that control that a low-range transfer case would provide. And I don't have my all-terrain progress control like we had in the other vehicle. But it's okay. Still pretty good control. We are locked in the first gear here. Pretty good grip out of these all-season tires. Not quite as smooth either. This is definitely more of an on-road tuned suspension setup. Definitely working hard. Not seeing any error messages though, no transmission overheat, nothing like that. But it's working it. Definitely building some heat in that torque converter. Come on, buddy. Go. We got the last log, the biggest, most challenging log. Ooh! Almost made it. There we go. So I was able to complete both challenges, but it was a little bit more uncomfortable, certainly, than that Range Rover, and I had to work quite a bit harder. There is a lot to show in this Lexus when it comes to gadgets and gizmos for off-roading. First of all, we have a switch here to go between high and low range on the transfer case, 4 high and 4 low. And then over here we have more manual buttons for your center differential lock, as well as your height adjustable suspension. But this is where things get fun. If I push this MTS button, now I can go through a number of different off-road modes here in the center screen. And it actually displays different colors on the main screen here, so you can see what the different modes are. So you can see we've got auto, sand, mud, and rock. But things are just getting going here because I also have downhill assist and crawl control, which I can activate at a push of a button. And now we can let the vehicle do its thing, take my foot off the accelerator, and let it go between all the different settings. Now we are in the Lexus LX 600 in low range, and I've gone ahead and I've selected height position 1 on the hydraulic suspension. Don't need to go into 2 for this, I don't think, and 1 should allow me a little bit softer of a ride, but we're gonna see how this vehicle performs. Now, overseas, as I mentioned, this vehicle is sold as the Toyota Land Cruiser, the 300 series, which is not coming to the US. We're getting what's called the Prado abroad, which is the smaller 250, and this is the only way to get into a 300 series in the States, but it is a hell of a vehicle. We've got a 409 horsepower twin turbo V6 under the hood, and all the off-road goodies you ever want, except for these enormous wheels. I think these are 22s. Oh man, I wish that Lexus would sell like an off-road oriented one. And this one, by the way, is the full business jet version, the Ultra Luxe with the captain's chairs in the back. They're not even that, they're business jet chairs in the back. It's $130,000 in this Lexus. Okay, so I'm not going to engage any special crawl controls yet, but I will go into the off-road setting, the rock setting on the multi-terrain select, and we're going to see how it performs. First mogul didn't even pick up a wheel. We got that solid rear axle articulating beautiful here. I'm going to stop, try to make it as hard as possible. What an absolute beast. It's going to get hard here. Well, harder for a lot of vehicles. Look at that, look at that, look at the performance of the Lexus. Even on street tires, absolutely destroys the trenches course like it wasn't even there. You could feel the front and specifically the rear articulating beautifully up the moguls. No issues whatsoever. Impressive result in this Lexus. I'd say that even tackled it better than the Range Rover because it did a better job of keeping wheels on the ground. I mean, Lexus build an off-road LX, right? You're building that GX, which is so good and capable. Let's bring some of that attitude to the LX. Let's do a Trail Hunter LX. You know how badass that would be? Give me some 18s and some all-terrain tires and a better approach angle because there's too much plastic on the outside of this thing. Oh man, that'd be amazing. For the logs course in the Lexus, we're going to engage our crawl control. I'm going to set it to the second position, which should more or less simulate the speed of the Range Rover. And foot off the accelerator, we're just going to let it crawl up the logs and let's see how comfortable it is. Now, one thing I don't like about the Lexus is the belt line is pretty high. The visibility is pretty low, but we do have off-road cameras. So once again, this is the vehicle driving, not me. I'm going to let it do the crawling up the logs. Got my foot off of the accelerator, and I can change the speed at any time using this mode selector. Here, I'll slow it down, make it more fair to the Range Rover. It's amazing. That is the smoothness and how deliberate that system is. Ride quality, excellent. Clearance, excellent. We got it in the higher setting here. Look at that. Come on, figure it out. Absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And I want to show off one more feature. There's also a turn assist button here. Okay, watch this. If I push this little button, it's actually going to lock up the inside wheel and allow me to make a tighter turn. I'm going to grab that inside wheel, lock it up, and really improve the turning radius of this vehicle. That turn assist functionality is pretty cool. So look, I mean, guys, this Lexus is a beast. I had my center diff lock on the whole time, but you can have it off even and let the computer figure it out. This thing is a monster. Now, when it comes to pricing, the Mercedes as equipped about $92,000. That Range Rover when new about $112,000, and that Lexus behind me as equipped about $130,000. But you can get them as low as about $90,000. But for me, guys, from an off-road standpoint, the Lexus was just the best performer here. It had the most articulation, it had the best traction control and traction devices, and it was the most comfortable. It's an expensive vehicle, but you know it's going to last a long time, and with some modifications, it could be an off-road beast. The other two, especially the Range Rover, also very impressive, but not quite on the same level. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. Let me know if you'd love to see a rematch where we can get our hands on a new Range Rover. And as always, has been Tommy behind the camera, Alex, and camera ninja Brendan running around. We'll see you in the next video.